fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's have claimed their first scalp of the season in the oppressive heat at Icon Park. If it's only a practice match if you lose, then what can we take away from a clinical performance in the twilight of February? Well, we'll find out tonight. And joining me to seek those answers is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to the Demonland listeners. Twilight it is, because you only get this broadcast once every 4 years, being the 29th of February. So we'll see how we go tonight and try and keep it short since it was such a great victory.
Well, George, I must say I'm a new man tonight. The pessimism and doom and gloom from last week is gone, and it's been replaced with positive Andy tonight. How long that is going to last, we might have an inkling this time next week as I sit in the stands of the SCG, either biting my nails or filing them with an emery board. So also joining us tonight is our resident statistician, who should have a bevy of stats this week to analyse and dissect, and from that draw the conclusion that we are indeed premiership favourites on this leap day, as George said, in February. Here is Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. I prefer analyst to statistician. My high school maths teacher would laugh quite significantly at the idea of me being a statistician, I can assure you. Great win, good win, and practice match. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But it did make me laugh, the narrative in the media, sort of. It's always, it's redemption or punishment, isn't it, in the media? So, it must have been hot. I couldn't end up making it. So I thought about you boys in the sweltering heat. A lot to like about the match, and I'm sure we'll touch on it. But just a special shout out to Max. I mean, good Lord, what a player. And it really felt, I don't know what you guys felt at the ground, but it really felt like, he was looking to make a statement early, and I think he did, didn't he? He was incredible.
Yeah, he certainly was. And I think someone on Demonland mentioned you talk about that redemption or doom storylines. I'm sure had we lost, they would have had plenty of articles already pre-written to say our season has already fallen.
D's wilt in the heat with the offs,
Yeah, absolutely.
The off-field drama.
And those articles will still be written, waiting for that opening round game to see what indeed happens. So, but we'll get to all of that shortly. Each week, I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We absolutely love the feedback, and we read it out on the show. Giving us a 5 stars, in effect, helps boost the podcast and brings more listeners to the show, and that in turn drives more people onto Demonland, and therefore we get more contributions from more voices to this show from our audience. So the best way you can help out the podcast is by amplifying us in the form of these reviews, or just by helping to spread the word about Demonland to your Demon family and friends. And all the way from Canada, Tristan writes, a fantastic podcast by Andy, George and Binman and all the listeners who contribute. I came across this podcast in 2021 and followed along as we broke the 57-year drought. Was so critical during 2021, especially when we couldn't always go to the games and had to find other avenues to stay in touch with fellow fans. The level of analysis and discussion is so far above any other program out there from an MFC perspective, and I absolutely love the way the host personalities work together. As a whole, a really balanced and even podcast because of this. I'm now living in Calgary for a period of time, and once again loving the Demonland podcast as my way of staying in touch with my lifelong club and hometown, Melbourne. Thanks for all the hard work everyone puts in to make this podcast happen, and keep it up, Tristan. Thank you, Tristan. What a great review. Thank you. George, do you want something to say?
Yeah, just a g'day to Tristan in Calgary, and being a Demons fan. And, of course, there's plenty of lovely skiing around Calgary, out at Sunshine or Lake Louise or Norquay. But also being a D fan, he would know that on at Sunshine there's one particular run called Delirium Dive, and you don't get to ski on Delirium Dive unless you've got an avalanche beacon to let you through the gates onto it. And you'd be absolutely bloody mad if you do that. But it'd be interesting to know whether Tristan's attempted it. I've stood at the top of it and looked at it and said, absolutely not. But yeah, good to see the D fans as far as Calgary.
Well, and good to see George that leaning into the stereotypes.
Yeah, I was just about to...
What's the joke about D's fans? If you're not actually a D's fan if you're skiing at Buller, I mean, who skis at Buller when you can go to Calgary?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, I'm a very big D's fan, and I've never been skiing. I think I've only seen snow once, and in my life. So
cheese boards. Golf claps.
Look, I'd like cheese.
Blankets.
To enjoy
yelling, kick it.
Well, that I definitely do. And
go number 9.
From Canada to the Netherlands, Julian writes, bridges the distance back home and guides through the emotional roller coaster of football fandom. Immense gratitude to Andy, George, Binman, and anyone else involved in making this show. As a D's fan overseas, this podcast helps me feel connected to the club and has helped me ride the waves of emotion over the last few years. Well, thank you, Julian. I'm glad that we can bring the Demon diaspora closer to home through this podcast. So, guys, keep the feedback coming. We really do appreciate a 5-star on Apple Podcasts. Please don't forget to click that write a review link and write a review, as well as giving us the 5 stars, because you can do both, but we appreciate the 5 stars and the review, and we will read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and you want to leave us feedback, post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week and just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show and keep you anonymous. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your preferred podcasting apps, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions or comments for this podcast, you can, you can read lots of threads and topics discussing all things Demons related. So join in on the conversation. If you'd like to join us on air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. I'll answer, put you on mute, bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. You can call this number during the week and leave us a message. We'll play it on the show. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. Get my co-host to keep an eye on that to bring up any questions or comments that we receive there. During the season, we are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30. Next week, we're doing our season preview show on Monday night on the eve of the 2024 season, which begins on Thursday night. So check in with us this coming Monday for our bumper 2024 season preview show, where you can marvel at our predictions for the upcoming year. And before we get into our review of last night's practice match against the Blues, I want to take a little bit of time to discuss the devastating news that we received last week when Angus Brayshaw announced that he would be retiring from football as a result of multiple concussions over his decades-long career. The decision follows extensive neurological testing and expert consultation, which concluded that Gus should be medically retired as a consequence of the concussion he sustained in the 2023 qualifying final against the Magpies. Angus Brayshaw, as we all know, is a beloved individual, a heart and soul type of player at the club, taken at pick number 3 right behind his good mate Christian Petrarca in the 2014 draft. Angus will finish his almost decade-long career at the Demons on 167 games, 49 goals, a third placing in the 2018 Brownlow Medal, and he was, of course, instrumental in our 57-year drought-breaking premiership. He will be forever remembered as a Demon premiership hero. I wish him nothing but health and happiness in his future. I have a lot of love and respect for the guy, and whilst I'm gutted that we've lost him on the field, I guess you got to be sort of happy for him that he was able to make this incredibly difficult decision, giving away something he absolutely loves doing, but he also has his whole life ahead of him, and continuing to play with the risks associated with concussion could have put all of that at risk, the life he's got ahead of him. So I hope the club can find a role for him as a mentor or a coach. I mean, the sky's the limit for Gus. He could easily go into the media. He's intelligent and articulate. He's a great bloke. Well, thank you, Gus, for everything you've given us supporters. It was a privilege and an honour to watch you play over the years. You bled red and blue for this club, and we, the supporters, are forever grateful for your contributions. Love you, Gus. We do have a question from a Demonlander about how we navigate this season without Gus. But before we get into that, guys, is there anything you want to say about this news and about Gus? George, I'll start with you, then Big Man, and then we'll jump in and get to that question.
Yeah, it was tragic. I'll just pick up on one comment you made about Gus going into the media where because he's intelligent and articulate, there's absolutely no space whatsoever for Gus based on what we hear each and every week. This was, look, it's absolutely devastating for the side, for Gus himself. I mean, young guy in your 20s and you're told basically that's it, no more sport. No, your whole life has been about playing sport. That's it. It's all over. It was a very tough decision for him to make for the club. You can't replace a player like this. He's in the top 5 at the very worst of our players. Taking a player of that quality out of any side is going to affect them. I don't like it when people say, "Oh, we can replace him with this, we'll replace him with that." You won't replace Angus Brayshaw. He's just got too much talent, too much capability, too many skills. It'll be a while before we see someone come up to the same level as him. What will happen this year as a result of his absence, we've just got to wait and see. We'll do the best we can with the other players that we've got. But, taking someone like that out at the start of the season is pretty similar if good quality players do an ACL before the first round, and that's what we're faced with. There's some big questions. There was an interesting article that Greg Baum put in The Age this morning about concussion. And I'd recommend everybody read it because Greg basically said nobody's asking the question, and the question is what toll is acceptable to we the spectators. I think we're starting to see people realise how dangerous this sport can be. And as he said, the games in the Coliseum used to be acceptable, but not anymore. The bare knuckle fighting used to be acceptable, but not anymore. And we've got to ask ourselves as supporters, are we prepared to see players like Angus Brayshaw taken out of the game simply because of what we want to see? You would think that there are some simple changes that the AFL could make, but they seem to be very loath to do so. We hope that they could make something as simple as I think Ben Mann suggested the other week. The bump goes. I'd go a little bit further than that. I'd say if you hit someone in the head, no matter which way you do it, you're going to face consequences. And we have to see the tribunal and the MRO back it up with real numbers. Last year, Nathan Broad got 4 weeks early on in the season for sling tackles. And guess what? The message went out pretty quickly throughout the whole competition. Sling tackles, you're going to suffer that. And the coaches tell the players you don't do that. They change their style of doing it. And the same thing has to happen eventually with the bump. So that's just my little piece. But losing Angus is a big loss to us as a club, and he'll be sadly missed.
Too right, Andy. I've got some thoughts. I'll try to not go. I'll try to rein my thoughts in. It's super distressing. It was just a tragic isn't. I don't. I'm pretty hyperbolic at times, but I think that's not far off a tragic for him, obviously. Most of all, and it's just an awful postscript to what I said at the time on our pod after that game. That was the worst experience I've ever had at almost one of the worst experiences I've ever had, full stop, but certainly at a sporting event. Just that febrile environment. And to be honest, I've I had a lot of angst towards Maynard, but I've parked that. I don't, I think it's not fair to expect others to. People can react how they want to Maynard. For me, I actually, have a lot more sort of angst towards the AFL. But I tell you what, it's going to be a long time before I forget fans booing and the Collingwood chant going up as Angus was getting taken off the ground in a cart. And he was out for at least 2 full minutes apparently. And so, that hit was leaving aside that Maynard's sort of culpability for it, that's going to happen again, and the rules that they've brought in aren't going to stop that happening again. And it's interesting, some of the dialogue about Gus. First of all, 100% right, both of you, in terms of what he's meant to the club. You're right, George, in terms of, I think it's really underestimated how flexible, how many different roles he played, and how important that was in 21, but also in the last couple of years, being able to play back behind the ball, being a midfielder. He was able to use him in so many different roles. But I think in terms of the club, the thing that we're going to miss the most is that he's a glue player, and every club needs a heart and soul player. It just happens to be he's one of our best players. Every club, organisation, workplace needs glue people, the people that bring people together and connect people and bring energy, and someone has to step up and fill that void, and that's not a natural thing for everyone to do. A lot of especially elite athletes, they're often very individual and focused on their own performance for good reason. So hopefully we can keep him around the club, but we're really going to miss that element. I think there was I forget who, so apologies, which poster this was, but a suggestion of having either retiring his number or doing something with his number. And I thought it something like, giving his number 10 to a player as a reward for, someone like I imagine Nibbler near the end of his career, coming up into his last season. He's a heart and soul type player, for instance, that in his, when he's announced that he's maybe got one more season, that he gets the number 10 at the Bluey, or a mid 24, 25-year-old young player who shows some of the characteristics and traits, and that Gus does is, that number 10 is a symbol of something. But so, it really is awful for him. Just a couple of things on the technicalities, though. One thing that's really, I think, important is that the history of concussion, he was getting tested, neurological, MRI, all sorts of psychometric testing all through his career, and he hadn't had a concussion for 5 years. So there's no question it was that hit that did it. He said he put that in his first paragraph of the letter that went out to the AFL. And anyone who hasn't read that letter, I absolutely encourage you to read that letter from Gus. There's no subtext. You can see exactly what he's saying. And one of the key messages of that letter that he to fans and to the footy community is the comment that he hopes that moving forward in this concussion, I think we should stop calling it concussion and call it head trauma, because that's what it is. It's not concussion, and head knocks makes it sound some sort of, it's weasel words really. It's head trauma, and that's what we saw in last year. This is the end result of it, and it was telling that Gus said in the letter that he hopes moving forward on this issue, the AFL is proactive, not reactive. I thought that was a really interesting thing to put in a letter, and I raise that because I really think the AFL, they have been reactive, and they're continuing to be reactive. And so, as George notes, the obvious one is to ban the bump. I mean, just ban it. So you could, yes, you could increase the penalties, and they've already seen it once already. Pal Pepper had a choice. He could have tackled. He didn't tackle. And he puts a young fella in his first game, Keane, out. Who knows if Keane's not going to play again? I mean, Keane has got concussion. Maybe he's got CTE. Maybe he's got brain damage from that hit. All because Pal Pepper chose to bump. Now, he's been given 4 weeks. Yes, that might mean some players hesitate to bump. But if they're not allowed to bump, if any bump, whether it hits them down through the middle of the chest or just on the shoulder, is immediately a suspension, the bump will go from the game. Goody said last year that he trains his players not to bump. And the question I would have is, what's the benefit of bumping? What do you get? Like in that example with Pal Pepper, what could have he got benefit other than rattling the cage of a young player? Where was the benefit? A tackle wouldn't have got. A tackle gives the opportunity to win the ball back as well. A bump doesn't necessarily. It just might jar it loose. And you risk, of course, losing Pal Pepper for 4 weeks. So, losing a key player. So for me, it's that health and safety principle. It's predictable. Someone's going to get seriously hurt from a bump. It's predictable. I don't see what value the bump has in the game, other than the sort of gladiatorial thing that George was mentioning, and that I hadn't read that article, George, but it's exactly right. And that game against Collingwood last year felt like that. The AFL built that game up. The whole atmosphere inside the ground was like that. It felt like we were baying for blood. And then it felt like the fans lost their minds afterwards, the Collingwood fans. So it was appalling behaviour. And so, you take the bump out of the game, and then, of course there'll still be clashes. There'll be grey area, but I just don't see what value the bump has in terms of the game. And the problem for the game is it's dominated by ex-bonehead footballers. The media is, it's a boys' club, the way it's run. And I just feel really strongly about, you lose a young fellow, as George said, 25, 26. He's lucky in some ways because he's, smart, switched on. But whatever, another young fellow who maybe has got not so many post-football options. I just think that the AFL, something's going to happen. There's almost no doubt there's going to be legal ramifications from this. And I know there's other pending. I mean, it's just such a sad irony that his fiance is Danny Frawley's daughter. It's just, it's got so many elements to it. So I think the AFL needs to bite the bullet and act more, because some other young man's going to have his football career, he's going to be concussed and out of the game. So, it's an awful way to start the year for the D's and obviously for Gus.
Just on the Pal Pepper thing, just briefly, they still deliberated in that case for like over an hour and a half. So it seems like, they gave him 4 weeks, but I'm not sure what the deliberations were over. But I think the interesting thing is going to be, all right, this is pre-season. They're giving someone 4 weeks. What are they going to do when it's qualifying final, preliminary final, and the same thing happens? That's the test. That's the test.
That's really what a boneheaded thing for Pal Pepper to do anyway. But no one's talking about Keane. I think that was his first or second game. He's a rookie or something. He's and last year we talked about it on the podcast, remember, when DeGoey went past the player against Freo and flattened the young Freo player, rookie at West Coast. And absolutely unnecessary. That's going to happen again when he went past the Shepherd and he knocked him this way to Wednesday. If that happens again, it's predictable what happens. And that OC health and safety principle, as I say, is, if there's a slip hazard, well, you fix the slip hazard. You don't just keep letting people slip on it and then go afterwards, oh, okay, maybe we need to do something. And I suspect what will drive them to do something is legal action ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And the simplest first step, and they could do it this year, is a directive to the MRO. If you cause someone to be concussed by your actions, then it's 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's it. Just put it straight out there. At the moment, you can concuss someone like Maynard did, get no penalty, or they go to the tribunal and they get a week, and yet the person who's concussed is out for weeks at a time.
And potentially their whole life is impacted. I mean, that injury must have been... The other thing I was curious about, Andy, what you said at the top, and this has been really unclear, I don't know if you guys have got any clarity on it, is there's been different messages. Did he retire, or was he given no choice? What's the...
There was the wording of medically retired. But I don't know if that's...
Which doesn't sound like a choice. And
him retiring based on the medical thing, or I think he had to front an AFL board or some medical board related to the AFL, and I don't know.
It's only supposition, but I can't see that any employer could tell someone like that to retire. But,
again, this is what I mean.
He's taking the correct advice from the medical experts. That's the good thing.
Can they? And this is what drives me nuts, is the AFL seems to me to put, they're the stewards of the game. They're responsible for, that's a workplace and they're responsible for it. Why are they allowing there to be any grey about this? It should be crystal clear whose decision that is. It's not crystal clear. Even on Demonland, there's lots of debate whether he chose to retire or was retired, which is what the, retired is an action word, isn't it? It's like someone else is retiring him. So, obviously he got that information, but he didn't sound thrilled. Like, it wasn't like, I initially thought, that's a brave decision he's making, but, he may not have had a choice. And the fact that that's not clear to me, that is another grey area that the AFL are, they're working in this grey zone that I think is no good for the game. And, too much of their emphasis is on the financial bottom line. Success for them looks like if the game is healthy finance-wise. And so, we're getting these ridiculously long seasons, this grey area about something like that. They've got to lead, not be driven by the financial bottom line, I reckon.
Pingu says, devastated about the news of Gus's retirement last week. Champion player whose career has been tragically cut short. I hope the club can find a role for him. He will forever be a premiership demon. We simply can't replace his on-field leadership, but how do you think we will cover the important role that he played? So we know there is no one to replace him, but how are we? What do you think we're...
As I said, from my perspective, what we'll really miss is his cultural, what he brings to the culture and that stuff.
Yeah, and that's irreplaceable.
To be honest, from a playing on-field perspective, I think we're actually pretty well positioned to cover for him in some respects, because Salo goes into the midfield. If Howes can make it, he goes back, for instance. Turner will come back in to provide some support back. I think, there's a lot's been made on Demonland about discussion of our list. I still maintain we've got the best list in the AFL. We've got good depth. I think we can cover him. I mean, George's comment about thinking about like an ACL is a really good one. I mean, Collingwood have lost McStay for the season, same sort of deal. So we can cover him for this year. And, it's a business, isn't it? So not wanting to be to be hypocritical and then jump into a cold sort of business analyst. We're going to have a lot of money at the end of this year to gap fill, aren't we? He must have been on a pretty reasonable salary.
No guarantees about that.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know yet whether we're going to be. I mean, whether he gets paid out, what happens, whether the AFL hold us to that in part of our salary cap.
Yeah. Well, there'll be insurance, presumably.
Yeah, he'll get paid out. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he'll get paid out, but surely that's not going to come from our
that'll
cap.
No, well,
we don't know.
There's nothing on that. Remember,
well, again,
there was an article
information from the AFL about this.
I read one article or a tweet or something from one of the journos saying that Melbourne will be in discussions with the AFL over what happens in terms of salary cap relief for that, whether it gets waived or whatever. I don't know. There haven't been any. There's nothing concrete yet, but I'm sure we'll be in discussion.
Well, there goes that positive reframe.
But if that's the case, yes, we may have some money. We've probably got Ben Brown and maybe Tom Mack retiring soon. I don't know.
Maybe so. I mean, I think on field we can cover him. I mean, as George said, how do you cover such a good player? But
and it doesn't matter how much money you got in the bank. There's got to be someone available to give it to.
That too.
There are a raft of good players coming, becoming free agents at the end of the year. Someone mentioned I think I read somewhere Goulden. That's who. It's like, let's get Goulden.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into our match overview. In a final warm up before the opening round, the D's showcased their prowess, defeating the Blues by 38 points in a practice match at Icon Park. The Demons displayed renewed forward connection, a potent forward line and a dominant midfield, leaving little doubt about their readiness for the oncoming season after a tumultuous off-season. The absence of key players, including Clayton Oliver, Harrison Petty, Charlie Spargo, Ben Brown and Lockie Hunter, didn't deter the Demons as they controlled the game from start to finish. Youngster Caleb Windsor emerged as a standout performer, making a compelling case for an opening round debut with his impressive display on the wing. The Duke showcased his impressive speed and skills, slotting through 2 magnificent goals on the run, putting the injured Lockie Hunter on notice. Fellow recruit Jack Billings also provided crucial run and link up and hit the scoreboard himself, and both should feature in next week's season opener. Captain Max Gawn delivered a vintage performance and had total aerial supremacy. His influence on the game was undeniable, finishing with 24 disposals, 30 hitouts, 5 clearances and 2 goals, earning him the all-important title of the game's best player in a practice match. The Demons demonstrated their attacking prowess with 15 goals from 10 individual contributors. The D's had 20 marks inside 50 to the Blues 8. Watching the KO mini later on, it was mentioned in the third quarter that we had taken 16 marks inside 50 at that stage of the game, which was a feat that we had only achieved 6 times in the entire game during the 2023 season. So that's quite impressive. If I had any knock on the D's forward line, it would be our inaccuracy, which was the curse of 2023. The inaccuracy was not reflected so much on the scoreboard as a number of those shots went across the goal face, not registering a score at all. Granted, the wind played a part in that, so I'll let that one slide for now. So back to positive Andy. Christian Salem's return from injury further bolstered Melbourne's midfield. He racked up 23 disposals, 9 tackles, 7 score involvements, 4 clearances, 4 marks and 4 inside 50s. Tom Sparrow also put in an outstanding performance, which included 3 goals and 20 disposals, highlighting the depth of talent within the midfield, which is still reeling from the loss of Angus Brayshaw and the absence of Clayton Oliver. The Blues struggled to contain Melbourne's relentless pressure, their defensive zoning and precise ball movement. Defensive lapses compounded by the absence of key defender Jacob Wiedering exposed vulnerability in Carlton's backline, which the D's exploited. The Blues were also hampered by the absence of young star Sam Walsh, forward Jack Martin and rebounding defender Zach Williams. With promising signs from new recruits and established stars alike, the Demons look poised for a strong start to the season as they prepare to face Sydney in the opening round. The comprehensive victory over Carlton, albeit in a practice match, acts as a reminder to those like me suffering from MFCSS, and also acts as a statement of intent signalling the D's readiness to compete at the highest level and once again be a contender in 2024. So, gentlemen, some brief takeaways from the match, and I'll start with you, George, because you also braved the sweltering heat at Icon Park, and then B-Man will cross to you for your 2 cents because you watched the game from the comfort of your air-conditioned man cave.
Just a bit weak is our bin man. So yeah. It was an interesting. My first takeaway from this game was how bad Carlton are.
That's a practice match, George. Come on,
I'm down with that.
Yeah, for a team that finished high in the finals last year, I could not believe how poor they were. They were like witches' hats for most of the night. Yes, they didn't have a Wiedering, but the fact is that the ball finished in the forward line, our forward line, where Wiedering would be standing, but the ball was still going in there. Our midfield was absolutely, completely and utterly dominant. Viney and Petrarca and Salem absolutely ran all over them. They took Pitnet off at halftime. So Max, of course, had an absolute party as a result of that. They finished up using Harry Mackay, for example, at times in the ruck, which is just ridiculous. Cripps was off for a long period in the second quarter, and quite frankly, if Cripps doesn't get the ball and kicks it long to Harry and Kerno, they
or throws it out of the middle with the most blatant throw I've ever seen.
He got pinged for once.
But they have nothing else. Their whole game plan is chip it around and try and get it to Kerno and Mackay in any way, shape or form up forward and hope that they mark it. There's no flow through the middle. It's just go sideways. From the back line, it has to go into Saad's hands. We'll face this situation next week with a similar scenario with Blakey. Just put someone on Saad and all of a sudden nothing happens. For Carlton, be the same with Sydney next week with Blakey.
Yeah, but we didn't put someone on Saad, and we don't generally do that. But we'll see.
But all I was saying is that's their only avenue. There was just nothing else. It was just awful to watch. Little gameplay. We played it far more seriously than we did the game against Richmond. We played a proper team defence. It was magnificent to watch. We held them to 60 points, and really, I think there was 3 goals scored when we brought the likes of Verrill and Tolstrup onto the ground. For the last 15 minutes or something like that. I think Carlton got 3 goals, but prior to that, they were going absolutely nowhere.
The scoreboard certainly flattered them. I think it was much more comprehensive than a 38-point victory. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were 36 points up in the first quarter. The game was over in the first 20 minutes, as far as the game was concerned. But it's only a practice match. But it was good. It was good because, we really saw what Salem's capable of, which was just remarkable. His ability to see players get the ball out of the middle. It's something we've learned to expect from him in the half-back line, but the middle's a completely different office to operate in, and he was just magnificent. Viney was just just fantastic as well. He seems. I didn't think it was possible for him to be tougher and harder and more reliable in the middle, but he certainly has.
Not just that, I think, and we mentioned it last week in terms of his disposal. He was at 90 or 93 disposal efficiency, and that's just remarkable. He's our best user at the ball in terms of disposal efficiency at the moment.
Petrarca gave Chera an absolute lesson in how to play the midfield. It was brutal what Petrarca's capable of, and it was just for Melbourne supporters, it was sheer joy to watch. And like the practice match last week, we got to see plenty of opportunity. We got to see plenty of opportunity to see players playing in different positions and opportunities for the younger ones. So we saw Windsor on the wing. Unfortunately, we didn't see as much as perhaps we would have liked for Verrill and Tolstrup and Kynan Brown. But I think it's starting to send a message, for the players who will be selected in the first game. These guys slotted in pretty nicely when they were called upon, so that's very promising. But overall, the team just looked really sharp and really, really ready for the season proper.
Absolutely, and as I said last week, my sense was this was the game that each year there's been one, and it's often been the first, actually the practice game, not the community series game, where it's been our full-scale practice for the season, and that's what we saw, I think. And for me, we jumped them because they weren't ready for a team that was in the headspace we were in. And I think that was a really good example of that was our first goal, which was Maxi's bomb from 60 metres. But if you go back and look at that, it's within the first minute, I think, of the game, is that Pittenet's on the mark, and he basically he's just not switched on and allows Maxi to run around, doesn't sprint at him, allows him to have that space. If you watch that, right from the get-go, they weren't switched on and we were switched on, and it was a full dress rehearsal for the Swans game. We'll get into it a bit later, but my read is that 22, that 23 is the 23 that starts leaving Verrill and the Tolstrup. That was junk time. For the first half is the thing to focus on, the first half, and then the first half of the third quarter. That's going to be the dress rehearsal for the Swans game next week. Same players, same positions. I think the only one difference will be Brown will come in for Cos, but we'll talk about that later. But I was super impressed with that attitude. And when we look at the numbers, I was actually thinking that, why I wouldn't read too much into it. We talked last week about, if a team's not applying AFL or even close to AFL level pressure, or one team is applying something near that and the other one isn't, then you're going to get a blowout. And I was thinking, well, I don't think the Blues were switched on. But when I looked at the numbers, I could look at the numbers actually for their contested possessions, for instance, were really high. They were only a few behind us, so it wasn't as if their effort was completely terrible like ours was in that 10-goal stretch when Richmond piled on and when Richmond were in that first 15 minutes in the practice game or whatever that simulation was last week. So, and just on your point, George, about Carlton, it's funny you should say that, because I was thinking during the game is that if the Carlton fans would think like it was a bit like being a D's fan last year, we look good but we're struggling to move it or whatever. I think that was a huge part of that was our all-team defence. I'll get to it a bit in a sec with the stats, but it just completely, it wasn't, they were trying to move it. They were trying to get it going, but they just couldn't because of how effective our all-team defence was. So impressive performance and some real individual highlights that we'll probably, we'll get to through the show. So, but, it was terrific to have a good hit out, and it was good, as much as I joke about that sort of redemption narrative in the media, it was good, wasn't it, to get a win to at least tamp that down a bit, and so we can, even on Demonland, it's been a little less angsty in the last 24 hours than it was after the Tigers loss.
Well, let's Big Man, you would have had a plethora of stats to pour over this week. You only had less than 24 hours to do it. Well, certainly as opposed to last week when we really didn't get much. So what insights can you give us from a statistical perspective?
Well, not too many stats because all I could find is the AFL stats on the game. Willo's not got them up yet, and I'm hoping Willow will post the stats again this year. They're the ones I sort of really relied on last season. But so again, as I said last week, we're just going to change it a little bit for the stats file this year. Just focus on the good, the bad, and the curious. I still haven't got I haven't got the rights to that song, but I'm on it. I'm on it, Andy. So I want a stinger when I get the copyright approval. I want my stinger.
Well, don't you have to just you can sort of change the music? Maybe we might have to get someone if anyone is musically inclined and can just sort of tweak it so that it's sort of what's the song that you want to use.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of variations on there. Enrico Morricone intro. So but last year I went through the key Melbourne stats and they will sort of make up the thing this year. But the key Melbourne stats again, it used to be clearances. That's no longer a key indicator for clubs, although we did really well in that space in this game. Time in forward half, front half turnovers, contested possessions, post clearance. They're a critical stat in footy and a critical stat for us. And there are a number of others that I would consider key indicators for us. Pressure being the sort of a big one as well. So, for new listeners, one of those. You can see if you go to the footy and have a pair of binoculars or go to a VFL game, they have it written up on the stats at the quarter time and 3/4 time, and they have up and down on those key indicators. So time in forward half, contested possessions, pressure, they're the three big ones, post-clearance possessions. So in terms of good, there were lots of good. The first half really is, I think the one to focus on. We dominated contest possession in the second quarter, and this is the big one, post-clearance possession in that second quarter. It's 23-8, which is huge. So we just smashed them. So that means your contest happens. The next contest possession winner was us, and there was only in the first half, both teams had 2 hit-outs to advantage in the opening term, but we won that measure 7-1 in the second quarter. So we really upped our game in terms of hit-out to advantage, and that's what George was talking about. And that was even before Pitnet. When did you say Pitnet went off, George?
Half-time.
Right, so that was 20. So I should say it was 23-8 for post-clearance possessions just in the second quarter. So we really upped our ratings. In that first half, we led forward half intercepts 9-3, and we converted that into 25 to 6 points advantage from that source, and that's huge. So I mentioned last week that 70% of scoring now comes from it used to be stoppages, and now it's from turnovers. And the gold standard turnover, of course, is turning it over in your front half. And there was a huge emphasis on that, and that's what I was touching on. There's a question later from Bigfoot about defense, so I won't go into it now, but we trapped them in our front half and they really struggled. Our way we set up the ground I thought was really interesting. They were really focused on defense, and again I'll touch on that later, but they were giving that kick to the corridor away, and they were basically challenging Carlton to take that on, and the only player down back they're confident with ball in hand to take that kick on is Sard. And so they were really sweating on that. I thought that was really positive. The team stats I thought that were really sort of jumped out were obviously a big measure for, when you're a forward half team like we are, is your inside 50s. This was sort of both sides of the good and bad coin. Where is it? So our inside 50s we won by, I had it just before. So stoppages were 36 to 27, so not huge. Clearances 37 to 30. Sorry, hit-outs 36 to 27, so not huge. But as I noted, hit-outs to advantage were our way. Clearances 37 to 32, which again is not massive. The big one here for us that fans of the centre square matchup were 15 to 8 for centre clearances. But interestingly, stoppage clearances they won by 2, 24 to 22. That's down a lot. That's down to us. Carlton bringing an extra to the stoppage. We always have one less to free a player up behind. This was the number that George was mentioning. I was really surprised with this, so that actually made the win better. In the good area for me was contested possessions were 130 our way, and they were 127. So it wasn't as if we just smashed them in contested possessions. That's contested possessions for all clubs is a key metric, and so for that to be so close indicates that it wasn't as if Carlton were just running around trying not to tackle. There was 65 to 62 turnovers, so they only had 3 more turnovers. So, that they were applying a fair bit of pressure on us. This was a huge, probably the one that was focused on in the commentary a fair bit. Marks inside 50, 20 it says here, but I'm pretty sure I read 21, which is the most that we had. We only had 21 once last year, and that was round 9 against the Hawks in the home and away season. I love this number 11 contested marks to 8. That's terrific. This is in terms of tackles 60 to 47. So, we were up on that. Again, Carlton sort of wasn't as if they didn't come to play completely, which makes the win better, I think, from my perspective. Here's a good one. Time in front. Match went for 108 minutes and 32 seconds. Our time in front was 108 minutes and 32 seconds. So you got to like that. 45 1% to 28. So we were really switched on, and we really came to play. The big number, really, from the club's point of view, was 63 points. So Australia scored as many goals against. Who did we play? Uzbekistan. As the Blues did. On the good thing, inside 50s was 65 to 43. Now, that's great for Melbourne. That's really a key metric for the Ds. The bad was, that we didn't win by more. I mean, it really shows the advantage of kicking accurately. They were flattered, Andy, 10-3. 63 to 15-11, and I don't know how many out on the Fools would you guess there were?
So many. Some that didn't make or went across goal. Yeah, there was at least 5 or 6.
Yeah, and it was probably the same for both sides. Mackay gave an absolute masterclass in shanking the ball.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as us. I mean, God, we were so I raise that as a bad because really, even though we won that game, we should have won by a lot more. And God, how many times have we seen that? And so obviously that 21 marks inside 50, a big chunk of that. Some of them were contested marks, some really great marks by JVR, who's going to be a star. He is a star, and I've been banging on about his. I think the best young forward in the game, and is just going to, or arguably, he's going to just go to another level this season. And he's just such a natural footballer. He's a pleasure to watch. But really, it was those kicks. Billings inside 50. Even Viney, Nibbler kicked a couple of nice ones to Shaki in a pocket. There was a nice kick from Nibbler to set up to Cos to put him to advantage. You've just got to take those chances, though. How windy was it at the? Like it looked windy on the telly. You could see
There was a strong northerly, certainly up until almost 3/4 time, but that's blowing across the ground. So
it was coming into
difficult.
Our face where we were sitting.
Yeah. And then the first of the westerly change came in about 3/4 times, but it was really fluky. So it'd be westerly, and then there was remnants of the northerly still there. So it was probably less noticeable in the stands compared to out on the ground. I think they were a lot more affected by the wind than people appreciated.
So we'll give them an out, but they've not got many credits in the poor kicking for goal bank. And surely to goodness, Frida won't have too many games where he kicks his ball. I mean, one didn't even get on the full; he kicked it into the man on the mark.
Yeah, Cozzy 1 goal 4 as well.
Yeah, Cozzy 1 goal 4. That's right. So we had 32 shots to 16 shots on goal. We doubled the amount of shots on goal, and we really, that percentage is going to come back to haunt us at the end of the season. In the practice ladder. So just on the bad, final bad really is Track and his kicking. So it was a funny dialogue. I went into the match day thread, and I don't normally do that. And Nibbler was getting roasted with his kicking. And I couldn't believe it, because I was just thinking how rubbish Track's kicking was. And I looked at half time at his disposal efficiency. It was 52% to Nibbler's 72%. And his kicking was appalling, Track, and he doesn't get any criticism for it. There was a discussion on Demonland today. It's the halo effect. When really good players, they overlook their weaknesses, and a player who some might consider like Nibbler, who isn't so good, their weaknesses get emphasised. Nibbler ended up with the same disposal efficiency as Salem, and not a single person criticised Salem through the whole chat. So I think Track, is. I don't know if it's too late for him to work on his kicking, but his kicking was appalling. And again, the wind plays a factor because his technique's so poor. That was a bad. In the curious, I think there were a number of curious things, one of which was the time on ground. Tomlinson, who got criticised a bit on Demonland, played 100% of the game, didn't come off the ground, which is remarkable. Lever 92, May 97, and Langdon was back to 98%. So really shows, you made that point a number of times over the last 2 or 3 years, George, how important that ability to have some players on the ground for the whole time is, for the ability to rest those utility players who set up that zone defence. And just the curious one that I wanted to flag that Montagna mentioned a couple of times in the call, and good on him for doing so, that we've had the last 2 seasons, it's just too big a number for it to be a statistical anomaly, that in the last 2 full home and away seasons, the D's have only been out of the top 4 twice. The last 3 seasons. Like, that is not, that's just, to me, an amazing stat. And that I just think that we consistently get underrated. Yes, we've gone out in straight sets, which is, that was awful. But, like, that's not a statistical anomaly. That's sustained excellence over a 3-year period. I mean, and I wonder, for the statisticians out there, how often that's ever happened in the history of AFL footy. I mean, 2 weeks in 3 full AFL seasons to be outside the top 4 is incredible, particularly for the Ds. I mean, God, I've followed the Ds all my life and would die for one season like that, let alone 3 in a row. So I think that, it sort of led me to thinking that last year our performance was underrated to a large extent, given how many players of quality that we lost. We had Fritter out for half of the season. We had Oliver out for half of the season. We had Maxi missing 4 or 5 games. We had T-Mac out. We had Melk out. We had Pets out. And yet we still finished top 4 and didn't fall out of the top 4 hardly at all last year, did we? So, good on Montagna for highlighting that. I think it's a good thing for us to focus on as we go into a season looking good. Every chance we'll be in the top 4 again.
I did a quick look at round 23 last year for the teams that were playing in the finals. We had 6, maybe 7 players unavailable. Like you said, Ben Brown, Fritsch, Petty, T-Mac, JVR for 1 game in the finals, Melcham and Hibbert. It's easy to forget. You look at the other teams, and those are, I only consider the top 22 type players in this sort of thing. Brisbane had Ashcroft. Carlton had Zach Williams. Collingwood had Nick Dacos and Moore, both who came back for the finals.
Exactly.
Yeah, GWS had Aaliyah, and that was it. And then
that's exactly right.
We had numbers, and you look at the other end of the spectrum. North had 13 not available on round 24. We go back to the old story about injuries going into finals. That's the whole story, and has been for the last 10 years now almost. It's who's got the players available. It's not surprising that Brisbane and Collingwood play in the finals with 0 players missing for Collingwood and Ashcroft missing for Brisbane.
And I just think that even D's fans, if using Demonland as a sort of proxy for D's fan, underestimate it. Even in this game, there was some talk in the media, or at least sort of filtered through Demonland, that they were missing Wiedering and Walsh. We were missing Petty, I'm not sure if they had other best 22s out of that team, but we were missing Petty, who's maybe not the equal of Wiedering in terms of importance, but not a mile off. We were missing Clary, who's easily the equal of Walsh. I mean, he's top 3 mid in the competition, let alone in our team. We're also missing Spargo, best 22 players. Spargo, Hunter, potentially McAdam if you think he's best 22. Obviously, I mentioned Petty. Who else? T-Mac. Well, he's maybe not best 22.
Ben Brown.
Ben Brown. So. There's no way Carlton were missing that many best 22 players.
Jake Melksham, he'd be if he did have an ACL,
absolutely.
he'd be playing.
Yep.
All right, let's get into our listener questions. Return to Glory asks, which former D's player could we most liken Caleb Windsor to, even though it's early days? So, B-Man, I noticed in the podcast thread on Demonland that you do have an answer already queued up for this one. You wouldn't tell us, so take it away.
Yeah, that was funny, that question, because when I was watching him, a player jumped into my head straight away that he just reminded me so much of, and it's such a coincidence, George. And shout out to the chief who on Demonland in that thread who's got it right, and such a coincidence that you said before, go number 9, and this wasn't a setup, I'm sure. I can promise you, Demonland listeners. Alan Johnson. He looks so much like Alan Johnson, and I went on today to check onto YouTube to check whether my memory was right. And there's a clip from, I think, 83. I've forgotten that he won 2 best and fairest, Alan Johnson. And there's highlights from his, I think it was his 83 season, and he's so similar. Hunchback, quick, super quick, runs and carries. And I think DL Fart mentioned that his pick for who I was thinking of was Stephen Stretch. And ironically, after that question was posted, I thought, maybe Stephen Stretch, and I had a look at his clip, but he's more sort of fluid and he's a bit, but he's reminded me so much of Alan Johnson. AJ was one of my favourite players, and I reckon, it was underrated, but I'd forgotten, as I said, that he won 2 blueies, but a champion player, fantastic player, and if Wins is half as good, we've got a star on our hands.
See, and George has also been to training a number of times, and I've really noticed his skill, that silky skill that he's got. But what I haven't noticed at training as much was how quick he is. When he put the afterburners on, I don't think I've seen that at training. I knew he was quick, but I hadn't seen it sort of up close in the flesh like I did. And Saad couldn't even keep up with him at one stage. Yeah. I mean, it was late in the game, and he was probably a bit tired. But put the jets on and just went.
George mentioned that last week, and it's so important, speed in footy, to break those lines, and that's what AJ used to do: is run and carry, and then have a shot at the end of it. So, someone mentioned that perhaps I was thinking of Travis Johnston, but Travis Johnston was a bit more laconic, he was a smooth mover, but he wasn't super quick, was he? No. I actually don't think, well, from a limited sample that I've seen, Windsor doesn't look as good a kick as TJ was. TJ is the best kick with Watsy that I think I can recall at the club. So
it's very hard to be running full pelt and kick those 2 goals like he did straight through the middle.
Check what I'll put it in this podcast thread. There's a goal that Alan Johnson kicks in the I think the semi against West Coast at VFL Park in the wet. That's almost it's almost the same as that. He runs and carries and kicks from 50. So Alan Johnson. Number 9, George.
I thought you were going to say David Neitz.
George, anything you want to add on Windsor?
No. He's what I particularly like about, I don't give any of the new recruits the chances in the first game. AFL's pretty ruthless, but he's slotting it. There's an opportunity there, and he's grabbing it with both hands, and his speed is something. And what really impressed me about that goal wasn't the fact that he kicked it, but the fact that he attempted to kick it. Normally you get an 18-year-old kid, they'll look to hand it off or something
absolutely.
Like that. There was no question. He was going for it, and that was it.
But
which tells me that he's got the green light to do it, George.
I want him to do that. Sometimes I get annoyed that the young players think that they have to, and probably it's drilled into them maybe, but maybe he's got the license.
Well, I think that's the thing is that talk a bit later with defence, but what George has talked about is the sort of footy's got analytics in it that the clubs really drill down on the it's not even out there for the footy fans to consume, but some players would have a green light in that situation, others would get dragged if they went for it.
Dominion says, thought we had the game sewn up at half time, and I was very happy with what I saw up until then. I know the three boys on the bench played in the earlier match, but I would like to have seen more of Varel, Brown and Tolstrup. What are your thoughts on their limited minutes, and did you think we should have rested Max and a few others earlier? So I'm pretty sure that Verrill and Tolstrup played in the earlier Casey game. It was moved from 2 p.m. to 10:30 a.m., but still obviously was played in stifling heat. And I'm pretty sure that Tolstrup, from the limited skerrits that we got, only played a half of that game. And given that he was named on the extended bench for the ones, that's why they've pulled him. I couldn't get any definitive information on how much time Varel played in the two, so he could have played 3/4 or a whole game. George, do you know anything?
I was told by someone else that he'd played a half.
A half, okay. So he also played a half, given that he was going to. I don't think Kynan Brown played a Casey at all. Do you know that?
No,
I don't think he played at all, because I think he was used as the sub, because it seemed as if we went into this game against Carlton with our best available 23, which is the 22 plus a sub. So Kynan Brown was used as the sub in this game, how we would use it in a real game. The aim was to play as much time as possible, even with that stifling heat, with that 23 players. And I think we can reasonably infer that the squad that played, with the exception of Kossi, will play in round one or in opening round. If this practice match was a real match, Kynan would have been the sub, as I said, and we'll talk opening round selections later and whether Clary will be called up, and there's a question later about the replacement of Kossi for the opening round. But given the hot conditions, do either of you think we should have rested some players like Max earlier than we did, given that Pitternet was taken off at halftime? And I will add, not just rest some players, but also not just to rest some players, but also to give guys like Kynan another chance to put his hand up for selection, and maybe he's already slated to take Kossi's spot. More on that later. But also to give a guy like Colt more of a chance, and Varel. I was impressed with Colt's 2 possessions. He had a great tackle, which led to a late goal. So, George, do you think we should have rested players earlier because of the heat?
I think you summed it all up there. That I would have preferred to have seen Max come off a bit earlier, particularly after they took Pitternet off.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a practice match. I don't think he needs to play 100 minutes of football in 30 plus degrees heat. Just get him off at half time, 3/4 time. There's nothing to be gained by that. I thought it was more important to give people like Varel and Tolstrup and Brown a chance to see something. Here's again an opportunity to see what they can produce against AFL level players. I think there's also still a big question about our backup ruck role. I don't think we'll get to it. I don't think Shacky's the answer. And Varel seems to show a lot more than what Shacky does in the ruck component, at least. So I thought, give him a full quarter, even if he's played a half earlier on in the day. Give him a chance to go, and he did pretty well, quite frankly, when he was brought on for that short period of time. So, I thought we could have rested a few other players. You really don't. You probably can't tell Jack Viney to come off, but you don't need track running around when you've got a Kynan Brown who could do with a few miles in the leg. Especially with Kossi being out next week, there's a very, very, very good chance that he's going to be the replacement.
Before Big Man goes, just you touched on Varel and saying, you'd like to see him, you don't think Shacky, and we'll talk Shacky a bit later as well. But where does Varel play when he's not? If it's Varel over Shacky, just say, because you want him, you think he's a better backup ruck for Max and to give him more time in that role. Where does Varel play then when he's not being the backup ruck?
That's the question, and that's why I would have preferred to see him on the ground a bit more. Play back up ruck, and then you can also drop him into the forward line to see how he goes down there. I mean, at the end of the day, he's 199, and a big kid. The trouble is, he had a shocking run last year with injuries, and he hasn't had much opportunity. But this would have been another opportunity. At this stage, I don't think they're going to change their minds all too much, but Varel keeps putting his hand up like that. So, perhaps an opportunity lost, but, we're not looking at the numbers, that they have to meet for their conditioning and things like that. Even when Pitnet, for example, was taken off at halftime, and Max did the same in the Richmond match. When they came off at halftime, they spent the halftime break running around the field, putting miles into their legs, both of them. So, we don't know the numbers that they have to reach, with their other training loads.
And that's one of the key reasons I think they would have been loath to bring the players on any early, and they did, and they probably, they gave them a taste at the end. So that last 10 minutes of the game was the sort of game over. But one, working backwards, absolutely, that would have been a factor. That was, is the loads. Then you take off for Viney, then he's got to go running around Princess Park for half an hour. I mean, I mentioned last week against the Tigers game that for me it looked like there's a chance we're coming off a heavy training phase, and that's our skills were poor. Universally across the ground last week, they were so much sharper this week. So I suspect that we were, that we're tapering, if you like, for want of a better word, for round one. And so if you take a player off for half a game, you've got to go run them around. So the only thing is the injury thing. You wouldn't want Max to get injured, but, he could injure himself running around the park, potentially. There was you wouldn't have seen it there was looked like a relatively animated conversation between Goody and Max at one stage. It appeared that Max was saying that, I don't want to come off, basically. So it was a sort of back and forth, but who knows if that's what they were talking about. So I think that's a massive factor, but as big a factor with the conditioning and the numbers and all of that, and the sort of loads that they're needing to run, the kilometres they're needing to run under match conditions, not just running because they're different as well, is that it was a full-scale practice game. And you don't muck around with your full-scale practice game by mucking around by taking off. They took Maxi off last week and gave Varela a run at it. He's not in the frame for round one. I mean, I'm positive Shaki's the player. So why, in a full-scale game where you're getting psychologically prepared for round one, you're practicing all of the systems, then you don't muck around with that. You don't bring them on just to give them 15, half an hour to run around to show what their wares are. The selection's been made for round one. It'll, as Andy said, it'll be that 23, I'm positive, or they'll bring in, maybe another player, Howes maybe on the mix, but otherwise, it was a full-scale practice game for all of their systems and their players, so you don't muck around with that. So that's my take on why they didn't. Having said that, it was great to see Tolstrup. He only kicked at it twice, but he did a nice little neat sidestep in the centre that sounded like a bit of a ooh and ah at the game, and and Varel looked pretty mobile for a big fella, didn't he?
And Tolstrup as well, I mentioned it earlier, he did a really nice tackle that resulted in, I think, our last goal of the game.
Who did I say? I meant Tolstrup, the Colt?
The Colt, yeah. Lefty says, thought our forward connection was excellent and only let down by set shot kicking for goal. How do you think our forwards fared, Shaki and Roo? Doug Remus says, been very critical of Shaki. I thought this was his best competitive performance for the club so far. Competed, took his chances and rucked okay. Stu adds, Shaki kicked 2 goals, 1, had 9 disposals and 4 marks. As Bidman touched on last week, because he's a great shot for goal, he doesn't need a lot of chances to impact the scoreboard. That's Shaki, not Bidman. Would you be satisfied if he had 4 marks and kicked 2 goals every week? So practice match aside, that was our best forward connection I've seen in a long while. Rui presented well, as did Fritsch, despite spraying a couple of set shots. I don't think we panicked going forward. Perhaps the pressure from the opposition wasn't all there. And yes, The set shot kicking wasn't fantastic, but there was a win to contend with. And Cozzy, as I mentioned, 1 goal for. But 10 separate goal scorers and 20 marks or 21 marks inside 50 is fantastic. Big man, your thoughts on our forward connection and the two big boys, Van Rooyen and Shaki? And then you can answer whether you would be happy with 4 marks and 2 goals every week.
Working backwards from the Shaxter, I would need a hell of a lot of chances to impact the scoreboard. That's certainly more than Shaki with his. But working back from him, I was pleased with Shaki's game, and I thought. His kicking was sublime. Those 2 kicks were from the boundary, and you both noted that the wind was coming across the ground. So that that was a tricky kick. Both were from opposite boundary kicks, and neither looked like they were going to miss. And really, taking your chances is we've seen in the finals last year how critical it is that taking chances, and it really made me think back to that game why the hell that Shaki didn't come onto the ground in the Blues game. But we'll leave that in the past. With his rucking, I think the knock on him is his physicality. I think that I'm happy for them to give him a chance. Pet's out. He's got his shot. For me, he's in the team for the first 3 games of the season. Rucking's a hard thing. It's a craft that players take a while to pick up. JVR was pretty hopeless at the beginning at Casey, and he got better. And Shaki, I think, will improve. He only needs to give almost JVR a chop out from doing it, even if he takes 6 or 7 ruck contests. And I was thinking also that rucking might, actually help with his physicality. It might help him sort of get used to more contests. He leads to good spots. He's tall. He's a big fella. So I think he's a lock for the first 2 or 3 round until Pets comes back into the frame. And I'm happy for him to, maybe of that backup ruck, if when Maxi's not rucking, 60%, 70% Shaki and 30% JVR. JVR did a little bit of it yesterday, but I think we see the benefit of not having him tank himself rucking, because he was fantastic, JVR. I mean, I just think the footy world underestimates him because he's not as tall as a Mackay or a Curnow, so he's not as physically imposing, but he's such a natural footballer. The mark he took where he pushed the player under that was my sort of mark back in the day. You don't move from the spot and just give him a good shove in the back, but his timing is excellent. He takes his chances generally, although he shanked a couple in this game, didn't he? One in particular. I thought they worked together pretty well too. And on the kicks, the connection, so the question about the connection, in a way, it goes back to what I was saying about analytics, is that, there's obviously, you kick into a pack if you don't have a player who can reliably deliver it, because we got a couple of goals against us when we turn it over the halfback flank with a poor kick, one of them from track, for instance. So, you take a risk if you go for a pass, a low, a percentage pass inside your forward 50 and turn it over. But with Billings, Windsor didn't really have that many, but Billings was excellent. I thought his kicks inside 50, there were, I think that kicking inside 50 was really good. Clearly they were looking to do that, and I mean that's Princess Park's not a very big ground, so it's not as if there's masses of space. One of the things I was really pleased with, there were some excellent kicks over into space as well. JVR kicked a beautiful one, so he's field kicking. He's in his career, I looked when I was comparing him to Ugle-Hagan and those other young key forwards, Ben King and others, he goes at 74% over his career disposal efficiency, and it really showed. So his kicking was excellent, and Shaki's also a pretty good field kick too. So you've got players kicking in. That's when you start getting 21 marks inside 50. And it looked great, didn't it? I still think, as we talked about ad infinitum last year, is people keep confusing connection with accuracy. So, doesn't matter how many kicks inside 50 you get. So no one's going to complaining about our connection when we get 21 marks inside 50. But, if we kick points the way we did, well, it doesn't really matter how many marks inside 50 you get.
And the other thing is we were completely dominant further up the ground, and you've got to expect 21 marks when you're putting the ball inside 50 as often as we were in that game. It's not surprising. I'm not as sold on Shaki. His 2 goals. He is an absolutely first-class kick. There is no doubt. Those shots were fantastic. Unless the ball gets dropped onto his chest, he doesn't mark it. He just can't. He has no insufficient physicality to do it.
And he's the opposite JVR too in a pack, isn't he?
He's exactly the opposite. Yeah. He'll be playing in Sydney. Sydney have got the same problems. They've got Grundy, and they've been using Amati and Logan McDonald in the rucks because they don't have anybody else. So we won't be disadvantaged by playing Shaki in the ruck when we're playing against Sydney, at least. I think they'll be looking at further options. Shaki's got the chance now to prove something. It's up to him. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, he's got his. That's exactly right. He's got his shot, and it's up to him, I guess, isn't it?
Yep.
Smurf says, I was beginning to lose faith in Sparrow, and I thought he stood up after quarter time and had an excellent game, kicking 3 goals. We need a big year from him, given Gus's retirement and Clary's potential absence. So after a very quiet first quarter, I think I don't think he touched the ball in the first quarter. Sparrow did step up to the plate with 20 possessions, 9 contested, 8 score involvements, 7 tackles, 2 clearances and 3 goals. George, were you impressed with young Swallow, and how important is he in the absence of Angus Brayshaw this season?
Young Swallow did particularly well. We've finally got rid of Bradshaw, and we've got Fullerton coming in, and yeah,
that's not very nice, Andy. Come on.
Although you're the Swallow.
Well, the summer's gone now, so it's one Sparrow.
Yeah, look, Sparrow was fantastic. You're absolutely right. Almost unsighted in the first quarter, and from there on in, he was into everything. It was great to watch, great for his confidence, and he's going to be part of our options. When we have to find a replacement for Brayshaw's role in the side. Viney steps up a bit, Salem goes in, Sparrow steps up a bit. That's how you replace someone. To go back to the old Moneyball situation, if you remember from that film, why did we get that particular player? Because he gets on base. He does that little bit more. You don't create a great player. You create a great player out of little bits of improvement across the whole side. And I think that's what we're doing. Sparrow's now reaching that prime age. He's been in the system 4 or 5 years now. The body
75 games, I think.
Yeah. The body's able to take the hits. All of a sudden, they start to produce.
He was great.
He was fantastic, and he's such a great long penetrating kick.
It's an underestimated part of his game. He kicks and straight too. The 3 goals is pretty good. That's where Brisbane have got a big sort of one wood over us, is they've got goal kicking midfielders.
Yeah.
So if he can step up and kick goals, you're right. And that was a really nice mark he took too, that sort of floating in front of the pack. And in that contest, the advantage of Shaki so tall is that you've got to man him up with a tall, and they were so busy sort of worrying about JVR and Shaki in that contest that he was allowed to ghost in front. The other thing is that he had our team high pressure points in that game, Swallow. So 3 goals and team high pressure points is a Sparrow. What am I saying? Captain Jack. Captain Jack. Andy, you've got him ahead now. I think it was Montagna, but maybe because I dislike King so much that it was him, and I'm giving it to Montagna. But he made a really good point. I thought that having to wax with Viney essentially from the half forward flank, coming in and being a midfielder is tricky. I think it was Montagna was saying, because you're sort of out of the game on half forward flank, and it's like what sort of role are you playing? But instead of 30-70 split, if he's 70% midfield, I thought it was a good point that it allows him to find his feet as a midfielder and step up and fill the sort of role that Gus could fill. And I think that could be the making of him. And the other thing is he looks in ripping nick, doesn't he?
Mm.
Yep. Red Jacket says, interesting centre bounce attendance stats that Andy posted in the post-game thread. I was really impressed with Salem's poise and polish in the middle, and was pleasantly surprised that he attended the most centre bounces for the Ds with 22. Viney had 20, Track 17, Sparrow 10, and Cozzy 9. Leave it to Diva asks, is Salo in the middle a lock for the season? Looking forward to the podcast again. So, Bin Man, You love a CBA statistic, and I'm, of course, not referring to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia statistics. Centre-bounce attendances, and Christian Salem with his poise and polish, as Red Jacket puts it, he's going to be an important piece of the midfield puzzle in the wake of Gus's retirement. Looks super fit. His elite disposal is just what we need. He had a bit of 2021 about him last night. Is he a lock for the midfield role in 2024?
I reckon he is a lock. And just another thing about the CBA attendances was really curious. If you accept the hypothesis this game was a dress rehearsal for round one and how we might play, and Buckwalter is the sort of midfield coach, isn't he? So is that if you look at the centre bounce attendances, of only 4 or 5 players went to centre bounce all night. I think it was Salo, Viney, Nibbler went to one, I think, and that was it. There was no Rivers. Cozzy was up there, the second or third. So it wasn't like the Richmond game where every man and his dog was getting a run through the middle, which to me suggests that that was an experiment, that they're not going to repeat that often. We'll have a fairly settled midfield group, and Salo will be in there. And I think that I think it's spot on what George was saying earlier about Salo, is that, as a midfielder, he's got some skills that I think are almost better than as a halfback flank. And one of them is his ability to stand up in a contest and get smart, use hands off. He's also clever with his sort of tapping. There was a bit of that tapping going on. He's he's got such great spatial awareness. And I reckon this is really underrated. Player like Daniel for the Dogs has got the same skill, and Maya, whatever his name is, the Cats, the ability to under pressure hit a 20-metre kick, whereas Track can't do that, and he's either has to bomb it or he handballs it, which is okay most of the time, but you can't control the footy when it's in chaos like that. Whereas Salo's got the ability just to bunt those 20-metre kicks. He's got the skill to be able to do it.
Finesse.
He's got that low.
Is the word.
Sorry?
Finesse is the word.
Yes, but also that peripheral vision, and then the advantage of that, it's okay, it's only a 15-metre kick. Laurie's got a bit of a similar one too, but then you can mark it, you can control it and set the game, the ground up ahead of them, and you can stop the chaos. So there was one where Maxi tapped it to him, he was on the run, he didn't actually handle it, would have just been the cherry on top. So I think he looks great in there. I reckon absolutely it was interesting. He was the number one centre bounce attendances, and I'm calling it the Salo effect.
George, anything on Salo, or we said no?
No, he's definitely going to be in there.
And one more thing about Salem and the kicking. So one of the other huge thing, I mentioned Billings, and I was trying to think, it was Salo was the other one, who having him kick more inside 50, and he kicked, I think it was 2. Can't recall who it was to, but he sort of summed up his options, and he kicked to space in a way that so few players do. So often Melbourne players drill it, and rather than drilling it to the leading player, he just sort of waded into space and allowed the forward to run onto it. I think maybe it was JVR, and it was just such a clever bit of play, but it was that combination of peripheral vision and ability to weight the footy. And so having him kick inside 50s with Billings and Windsor is going to be huge for us this year.
You got me excited about this season, Bin Man. Premiership favourites. Wow. Bigfoot says, no, we're not. We're on Billings now. Wodger the First says, I believe Billings only played a handful of games for the Saints in the last 2 seasons due to a combination of injuries and form loss prior to coming over to us. I know it's early days, but it appears that he has found a new lease on life. Boy, does he have some silky skills. I'm very bullish about how good this could turn out for him and for us. I hope he plays in the ones against Sydney. No question from me, just a comment. I think he's an absolute lock for opening round. 17 possessions, 6 score involvements, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 3 inside 50s, kicked a goal, could have been 2. Fantastic acquisition, and if he's fit, will play a big role this season, correcting one of our deficiencies, which is our disposal, or 2 of our deficiencies, disposal and forward connection. George?
Yeah, he was brilliant. He played 3 games in 2023 at St Kilda, one of which was as a sub. He played 8 games in 2022 one of which was as a sub, so he's played the grand total of 9 effective games in the last 2 years because of injury. And it's not surprising your form drops off if you're playing, half a dozen or 10 games in the space of 2 years, and your confidence drops off and all that sort of thing. He is a brilliant kick. He is absolutely brilliant to watch.
He did one of those kicks where he waded it into space. It might have been him. He kicked a Shacky, actually. It was such a good kick.
Over the top into the space, and it was just, and he did the same thing in the Richmond game
to Fritsch,
Yeah. So brilliant to watch. The other advantage that we're going to see of having Billings is we suspect that Windsor will be sitting on the other wing. In this match, they were rotating Windsor, Billings and Langdon, basically, but it enables a young kid like Windsor to play on the wing because Billings can rotate with him. You can't expect a kid to come in and play 100 minutes like a Langdon does on the wing.
Is that the role he was playing in that? Right, the wing, Billings, he was playing mainly the wings, right?
Billings was wing moving to half forward, sort of. But he's obviously part of that rotation, which is going to be important. Like I said, you don't want the 17 or 18-year-old kid having to run 100 minutes on the wing up and down. He'll be cooked by the end of it and probably beyond. So if we suspect that Windsor's going to be in the first match, it's because Billings is able to cover off for him as well. But a brilliant player. Great vision. I just wish I wish he was more involved in the game. We'd like to see a lot more of him.
I think we're good, George. I think that's what we're going to see. He'll get his 14, 15, 17, 18, 20 possessions.
17's all right.
That's what I think that's what we're going to get. But if we get 17 quality possessions into our forward line, I'm happy with that. If he kicks 1 goal, 2 goals, I'm happy with that.
I can't remember if I mentioned. I think I did mention this last week, but the sort of question mark on him at the Saints was his defensive. That not defensive minded enough, and I don't think Lyon was a fan for that reason. And again, I can't recall if I might have said this last week or written it on Demonland, but we've got enough players to cover the defensive hard in it. That's what we need is a player. I don't care if he's, as long as he runs to the right spots. Like the defense isn't just tackling, it's doing the right thing and running to the right spots. And the other thing that was funny about him is that idea of confirmation bias. When he was lining up for that shot for goal, I thought he was never going to miss it. And then he missed the next one, and Montagna noted that he had the yips at St Kilda. I'd remembered that, but I wouldn't have been confident at all on that first one if I'd remembered. For such a brilliant field kick, he could barely kick straight for about 2 years, remember. He had the total Ian Baker-Fitch yips there for about 2-3 seasons. And just while I think about it, Andy, last week I was asked you both whether, how often do players come from the halfback flank and roll through to the middle and go back to the halfback flank? And we couldn't really think of anyone, and I forget who it was, noted on Demonland that in fact Collingwood did that quite a lot last year with Crisp and Dacos coming off the halfback flank into the centre. So there's no reason why. I'm not sure if they did that last night. Do you remember where Salo went when he wasn't on ball? But there's no reason he couldn't go back in the same way that Dacos does.
Yeah, I don't think Salo went anywhere else other than midfield.
Yeah. Right.
He played a substantial part of the game.
Yeah, 22 centre bounce attendances, which is probably almost every single one of them, except when he was on the bench. What I noticed in terms of the stoppages around the ground, guys like Rivers would often be just on the periphery of that, so not one of the midfielders right in amongst it, but being that on the outside to receive, a quick handball out, and that's what our back flankers, I think, are going to be doing.
How was that kick from Rivers to Cos? That little dart. Come on, be still my beating heart. Come, Riv. What a player.
Absolute scorcher. Absolute scorcher.
Bigfoot says, very happy with the way we zoned in defence and were able to play tempo footy when needed. It was the mirror image of the way we played the match simulation against the Tigers, playing devil's advocate here, but were there any concerns that we still gave up 3 goals apiece to their 2 key forwards in Curnow and Mackay? The latter could have kicked 5 if he knew how to kick. Granted, they're both Coleman medalists, and granted our defence shut down any other scoring opportunities and kept them under 70 points. So I'm not sure mirror image is the right description. I think what he might have meant because of the style game plan for the match. But it was diametrically opposed, I think is probably the word, but semantics aside, I think our defence played really well. We cut off avenues forward to the opposition. We applied pressure. We never panicked. We played the tempo footy when needed. I was bullish on Carlton in the pre-season, and perhaps it was only a practice match. I've got to remember that, and we don't know what their intentions and goals were for the game, but I thought they were very one-dimensional in their approach to goal, and if they're not careful, they could get worked out, and we of all teams know exactly how that story goes. Big man, thoughts on our defence, and is it a concern that their two Coleman medalists kicked mini bags on the day?
Yeah. I'll get to that, but I've got a clip that I was going to talk about in the stats file, but it fitted better here about our defence. This is Goody being interviewed pre-game by David King, I think, and Sarah Jones, who talks about our defence. If you could play that clip, Andy.
Yep.
What's new in terms of the methodology and the way you want to play? What will the fans be looking for tonight?
Clearly, like all teams, everyone wants to play a little bit faster, and we're no different in that space. But what we want to make sure is that we celebrate what we're good at. If you chase too much of what you're not good at, you can lose what you're great at, and that's our challenge. We want to certainly improve the way we move the ball, improve our efficiency inside 50, but we want to actually celebrate what we're good at.
Thanks, Andy. And that's all he said, and I heard that, and I thought to myself, right, we're going to strangle them. We're going to defensively strangle them, because I talked it in the stats is what, the Melbourne way of footy and the key stats that tell about Melbourne way of footy. The number one thing is our ability to stop the opposition scoring. That is our one wood, and I found that comment really, really fascinating by Goody. He didn't mention it, but what we're good at is defence. And then after the game, McWalter was interviewed in a press conference. What did he say? He emphasised defence when asked about, you look better moving the ball inside 50. He came back to no defence. Salo, there's a clip of him being interviewed directly after the game, or something, a little while after the game. It was still at Princess Park. He was asked about the game. First thing he said was, I think we kept them to 10 goals. And so it was clearly a message going in, is that Melbourne's one wood is how good we are at defending, and that is the reason why we've not been out of the top 4 for the last 3 years, because we are the best defence in the AFL by a country mile. Every other team has copied our zone defence, and with the possible exception of Port Adelaide and Brisbane Lions, but everyone else has put a form of our zone defence, which I think of it like a web or a grid. And I thought it was fascinating the way we set up. They were clearly hyper focused on shutting out the outlets from the Carlton, and Carlton looked super frustrated at times because we were giving up the corridor. We were inviting them to take that kick on, and that's what I meant by analytics before, is only some players in their back half would be allowed to take that kick on, and we sweated on it. We only got 2 goals, I think, from a turnover from when they kicked into the corridor, and that blew their brains, because only Saad really is reliable enough to hit that. We sweated on it, but what it meant was that even Saad was getting frustrated. Our grid was so well set up, and players were disciplined and running hard to get to those spots. He didn't know where to go. They were trying to move the ball quick, but they got stuck. They got stuck in our web, and you could see they were getting frustrated. That classic, what we saw so much of in 21, when players look up the field and get annoyed because it's like, well, what do I do? Where do I go here? And for me, I thought that was just brilliant, and I found it really interesting that was the focus that they brought in. So let's get back. Every team wants to move the ball fast. Yep, that's good. Well, what we're going to be good at is stopping oppositions move the ball fast. Let them take that on. And that was made a bit easier by how small Princess Park is, and we'll get tested obviously on the MCG. But next week's game is at the SCG, isn't it?
Yep.
So that's an even smaller ground than Princess Park. So I thought that was really fascinating. Both, that was clearly emphasis. Our defence was brilliant. It shouldn't be, we only gave up 13 shots at goals or whatever they had on the full, but 10-3. That easily could have been 7, 6 or something, and we win by 60 points. So that was clearly a message going in. So as to the question as, part of that piece of the puzzle is that you've got to give up goals to the bigs. So when they do finally get it and move it, well, Mackay and Curnow are the two best marking forwards in the AFL.
Yeah.
So, and clearly it wasn't bothering them so much. Tomo was on the ground for 100% of the time. So, if you end up, the opposition only get 10 goals. So we've talked about this over the last 3 years, haven't we? Is that the focus for them? They clearly had a number in their mind because, as I said, Salo was the first thing he said was 10 goals. I think they only got 10 goals. It was clearly a key performance indicator going into the game.
Yeah, remember when I interviewed...
Who cares whether if you keep him if the goal was to keep Carlton to no more than 10 goals? Who cares if two of those players kick 6 of those goals?
Was it Stephen May when I interviewed him? Mentioned a number, I think it was 75 or something, 70, 75.
Yeah,
I think
up
that's what
last
they
year.
wanted.
So I wonder whether they're looking at, in fact, this will frustrate some fans because, is that maybe Goody's going the other way saying, no, well, we're going to get better. We're going to get better at creating that grid. Let Collingwood try to pick their way through. Let's see how they go. And, as we talked about last week, the back half, the last third of last season in the finals was played the way Melbourne play footy. And, all of this fast ball movement is for the first 2/3 of the season. It's not for when the whips are cracking.
CD asks, how did you rate Blake Howe's game? My sense is that he will learn reasonably quickly what his strengths and weaknesses are and adjust his game accordingly at the top level. Can he make it at AFL level? I'd say probably yes. In the meantime, we may see some goals leak if he stays in the starting 22. Just my opinion. Be interested in your thoughts. Now, I was certainly more positive about his game this week than in the match sim against the Tigers where he seemed in over his head. But having said that, as we mentioned, our game style from that match to this one was completely different. And in the match sim, because of the way we played, he was under siege and often in no man's land on the quick turnover, which wasn't his fault. He only had the 6 possessions this week, took a very nice grab in defence. He's still learning. He could still turn out to be the Judd McVie of 2024. Casey watchers were very bullish on him. I'm happy to persist for the moment. George, your views on House's match and the expectation on him, and is there anyone else that can fill that halfback role? We're a man short on the list now with Gus's retirement.
I think the interesting thing with Howes is, we've said a couple of times on this program that was basically the 23 that we'll see next week.
Mm-hmm.
And Howes was one of those.
Yeah.
A couple of things that Howes provided. Firstly, he enables Salem to go into the middle.
Yep.
So there's the first positive. The last week or the previous game against, he was playing on Bolton. And we were not playing a zone defence the previous week. This week we were. We've, as Binsman's just explained, we saw what the effect of that was. Howes is learning to play within that zone defence role, and he did exactly what he needed to do. So I think we'll be seeing him this week and for weeks on, because firstly, Salo's moved away from the halfback line. He's got 2, and we also need rotations for Bowie and Rivers. He provides a nice option there. The only other option we essentially have would be someone like Marty Hoare. I don't know if he's ready.
Looks pretty fit, but he's different players. He's more of a key position defender, isn't he?
Yeah, and there's. It's difficult, because Howes is reasonably tall as well. It's hard to say, but the opportunity's there for Howes to take. The chances are there, so I think he was cruelled horribly by injury over the last couple of years now.
And we talked about it last year. Andy said that he'd heard he was really close to selection before he broke his wrist or whatever that mid-season injury was.
Yeah, so I think he'll be there. He fills the role. This is what we were saying before. How do you replace Brayshaw? You can't replace him, but you put a little bit of Salem in, you put a little bit of Howes in, you put a little bit of a
bit of Monica in.
A bit, yeah. That's enough. Do we have to pay for that?
Surely if I quote lyrics, then that's all right. I mean, it's a bit the same with Langdon. There's been a sort of question marks over him, but I think you hit the nail on the head, George. I mean, I was thinking, watching the players, there's sort of this utility role where players, what role do they play? You know, they're sort of, okay, nominally they start with the 6-6-6, they start down back, but you know, it's all about the role and that sort of grid all-team defence, which Salo talks about in that interview that I mentioned, really is about players who are disciplined to run to a spot, even if they're not going to get the ball. And and so, you know, Goody would say it doesn't matter if he doesn't get any possessions. If he's run to the right spots, he's blocked off outlet options. He's, you know, that he's played his role, and I think that's the same is true of Langdon.
Just a bit on the Casey game. The Casey match, it was originally scheduled, as I mentioned, at 2 p.m. prior to the main event, but due to the forecasted high temperatures, the game was moved to a closed session at 10:30 a.m. at Icon Park. As a result, we had to rely on updates via social media, and now the Demons chose to only update the fan base at the end of each quarter, and that only included the score and the goal kickers. Not much information other than that. We had a very vested interest in this match because four-time Bluey winner Clayton Oliver was playing in an attempt to stake his claim for an opening round berth. Fortunately, the Carlton reserves have a Twitter account, and they were updating the scores more frequently. Unfortunately for us Casey fans, they only updated the scores when Carlton scored a goal, and I quickly cottoned on that there were long periods of no updates from the Blues, so I surmised that Casey were on a mad tear. Casey ultimately won the match by 29 points after leading by 47 points at three-quarter time in the sweltering heat, that is. And since the match, we have not been able to glean much more than scores and goal kickers from the club, but the debrief on Twitter and Facebook had some intel from the match from someone there. Clary, high energy, dominated at times. No one could go with him. Lots of run and carry, got better as the game went on. Jefferson took a big pack mark and goaled from 40, looks a real player. Tolstrup, super impressive, brilliant crumbing goal and played time in the middle. T-Mac looked comfortable down back, good communication with Hoare. Hoare did bits and pieces, solid. Fullerton rucked most of the game, promising signs. And Wowie didn't see much game time but played in the middle. Now, Whispering Jack and I saw Wowie as we were walking to the ground last night and noticed that his quad was heavily strapped and he had a slight limp. As would be expected considering the bandage that was on his leg. So watch this space. Clearly, Clary's a cut above playing in the twos, and that leads us to selection news. So Mandy Lorian says, let's not bury the lead here. Is Clary getting selected to play in the opening round match against the Swans? It's time to fully welcome him back to the fold. Doug Reamer says, didn't see Oliver's VFL appearance. Did he only play in the midfield? What was his rotating position? If he comes in, what amount of time do you think he would play in the middle if he does against Sydney? Look, I'm all in. Welcome back, Clary. However, I think based on I think we did go out with the 22-23 we're going to play this week, so maybe not. So George, followed by Big Man. Clary, yay or nay? And if he does play, is he straight back in the guts? Do we ease him in by playing him in the forward line, or is he not? Are we not going to see him this week?
I think as the conversation with a number of Demon fans I had last night was, I think there's been a club-imposed suspension on him of some sort. We don't know how long. From all the reports here from the previous game and this, he's physically capable, ready. It's whether the club considers that he is emotionally ready and has served his time.
And this is conjecture, but by people, this isn't.
There's nothing
official.
Yeah. But it certainly has all the appearances of. Otherwise, why would you have one of the best players in the AFL playing?
And he's going to edit that out in post.
No. That's all right.
He's so far above VFL standard play. It's ridiculous. So if the club's happy, he obviously had a series of KPIs he had to reach. If those have been reached, I think he'll be playing. We can only wait and see. We don't know the inside story.
I'm a No, well, one, I don't think he will be selected. This was the dress rehearsal, as I said. Two, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the true. There should be some consequences. They were clear that he broke team rules last year. He didn't miss any games last year. They were clear he broke team rules. It is a confusing message to send to young players that if there aren't consequences, whatever the mitigating factors are, there's still, I think if there were consequences, that's good for Clary, that's good for the team. But mainly, I think that we don't need him in the first round. There's one benefit of not playing him is that we're not sending a message to the rest of the competition that, oh my God, we've had off season from hell, blah, blah, blah. We're so desperate. We've lost Gus and all of the drama and blah, blah, blah. We have to bring Clary in. So I wouldn't be doing that. Secondly is that whilst he looks fit, he's only been playing VFL. He's not a robot. He missed a big chunk of pre-season, so it's unlikely he's done enough kilometres that, really he's probably not as fit as he could be. Yes, he's a star, but it's too easy to say, we're going to rest him up forward. We've talked about the mix of time on ground is so finely tuned. You can't just pop him up forward. It's not VFL 1979. And the other thing, I think just mainly, to be honest, my main thing is what I said last week, is that psychologically I think it's good for him to ease back into it, to take the pressure off him. He's not the saviour. Allow him to come back in and not have that first round pressure on him. Don't allow the club to be bloody, follow the media's narrative and they'll want to have the Clary story. Let's win against the Swans and ease him back in the second or third round.
Well, let's go into Cozzy's replacement. Scroll says Cozzy isn't available for our match against the Swans in opening round. How will we cover his loss in the forward line and who takes his place? I haven't been overly impressed with any of our small forwards in the two pracking matches, with the exception of Kynan Brown, but he wasn't given much of a chance to put his hand up against the Blues. D. Oldfart replies, based on the Richmond match sim, I thought that Pup Brown might be a good chance. What does the panel think? P.S. I was disappointed that he wasn't given more ground time against Carlton. Could this be an indication that our match committee thinks he's not quite ready? And as we've said, I assume that our team to take on the Blues was best available 22 plus the sub, with the caveat that Clary wasn't considered for whatever internal reasons, as we mentioned, that may be between him and the club. So Clary's case aside, we want the Blues practice match. We went into the Blues practice match with the best 22 plus a sub that is currently in form and not coming back from injury, for example, T-Mac and Fullerton. So this was the current best 22 plus sub that would play against any opposition. Now we have a situation where Cozzy's ineligible to play this week. He comes out. Does that automatically mean Kynan Brown as the sub slots in? If not him, is Clary or someone else? Big man, then George, who replaces Cozzy.
I reckon it's a no-brainer. He plays a similar role to Cozzy. We saw against, well, even the tiny bit in this match, but certainly against Richmond, he's got that same energy of zipping around and tackling, and he obviously kicked a nice goal against Richmond. It's a no-brainer for him to come in for Cozzy, and it also makes sense is that I hadn't realised, Andy, because I didn't see that because they didn't have a 23, it didn't, that Kynan Brown was the 23rd player, but that makes perfect sense that he was the sub and he came on at approximately the same time he would have. So it's the way I see it rolling is a total no-brainer that Cos is out for 1 week. Brown takes the full game, and the following, and I'm not sure who that means for sub, but then the following week for round one, our second game, Cos comes back in and Brown back to the bench as sub. It's like and I wouldn't be surprised, particularly because of Brown's energy and sort of effervescence, is that he would make for an excellent sub. You bring him on late, maybe he's a bit undersized, so he's not as flexible as someone else. But Goody, we know how with JJ City puts a note in the chat room that he topped their possessions in the practice game up there. So, but he was used, he was used as a sub a lot, JJ, and Goody obviously likes that. Goody repeats things, so wouldn't shock me if that he's a bit of a go-to sub for a big chunk of the season, Brown. But just while I think of it, there's also a comment from Leave It to Diva that's a good in the chat room as well, that perhaps that medically discharged stuff around Gus is related to the insurance somehow. So maybe that's a factor in the mix. So that actually makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll see Kynan Brown in some way, shape, or form. The sad part is we're going to miss Cozzy up forward undoubtedly, but we're also going to miss him in the midfield in a big way. The way that we've seen him play in these last two games, which means that people like Salem are going to spend a lot of time, like they did in this game against Carlton, in the midfield. Their time in the midfield is going to be greater than what perhaps we normally would want. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see people like Billings go in for a couple just to cover off the Cozzy who's missing. But I think over the season we'll see Cozzy
or Laurie. Laurie could go in and take some time.
Or Laurie, just a little bit here and a little bit, once again. So
not Nibbler.
No. But Kynan Brown's the obvious. He's again a real surprise for a guy who was picked up as a rookie to be playing in the first game in your first season, unheard of almost, and it's just remarkable what he could bring to the side. And again, here's your big chance, kid. We could be playing 3 first game players in the first round.
Yeah, I mentioned that on Demonland today, is that I wonder when the Ds or any top 4 team that finished the year, top 4 has 3 draftees from, first year draftees debuting in in the round 1 of the following season.
I think our best effort was Jackson and Cozzy after they were recruited, but it'd be very unusual.
All right, let's get into a bit of preview of the Swans game. The Demons and the Swans have the honour of opening the 2024 AFL season on the big Thursday night stage. And after a turbulent off-season, the D's are looking to overcome their own demons following on from consecutive straight sets finals exits by striking an early knockout blow. The Swans, too, will be keen to take an early scalp after almost missing out on finals last season and then exiting very quickly at the hands of the Blues, possibly with some payback from the goal line gods that got them into the finals. All eyes, if you remember in the Carlton game, I think they had 2 goals taken off them. All eyes will be on the first bounce of the season as former enemies turned teammates turned enemies. Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy face off for the first time since Grundy's exit from the Demons in the 2023 trade period. Singer says, surprised that there hasn't been more hype surrounding the rematch of the century in Gawn versus Grundy. Who wins the battle? George, then Big Man.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game because you always get a good game from the Swans. They have got extremely talented players across all lines, and they are great with their kicking. Absolutely fantastic. You could just go through the team and you could name a dozen players who are first class kicks on every line. So they're fantastic. I don't think there'll be much of a Grundy versus Gawn match because very simply Grundy's, as we found out, firstly he's not a forward, but he doesn't have the marking power around the ground in the way that Max is. And if Max is in the same form as he was against Carlton next Thursday night, Grundy will be very quickly forgotten. They're also missing Parker, who broke his arm in the GWS practice game. Parker's not as influential as what he used to be, but he's another one of these sort of solid players in the midfield. One of the things, it was a difficult match. I watched the GWS game that they played. It was played in 35-degree heat in the middle of the day, which was just ridiculous. So it's hard to take a lot away from it. But their standout player was Blakey on the half-back line. If he gets the ball, it was the same as Sard. If he
plays a bit like Rivers too, doesn't he? Running carries.
Yeah. And he drives them forward, and he's a great kick, and he runs forever. So
he's a gun.
It's a kick.
And Gordon's the other player, sort of not quite. He's not defender, but
interestingly, they Who didn't they didn't name Warner this week as well in their practice game.
And Papley, which suggests to me that and Mills is the other one who's out.
Mills, Mills,
I mean, annoys me with the media narrative, but everyone's jumping on Melbourne's poor culture. No one seems to be talking about the fact that Mills screwed up his shoulder big time. He's out till middle of the year. They don't reckon he'll be back to round 8 or 9 at best. A shoulder, had to have a shoulder reco, which would have screwed up all of his weight work, would have made his aerobic work non-existent. His season's basically gone. That was on the piss at a Mad Monday event, and they named him captain after that.
Yeah.
Give me a break, and we get knocked. And so they've got no Parker, and no who was the other player you mentioned? The blonde guy,
Warner.
Oh no, not Warner. So the other mid that you mentioned. The one who's out broke his arm.
Mills. Parker.
Parker, yeah. So Parker out, Mills out. They're he's their two best mids.
Also tonight, Taylor Adams will take no further part in the game. He has a mild medial ligament strain and has been taken off as a precaution. And then they only played a 20-minute final term with no time on due to the hot conditions that they've played in sweltering heat 2 weeks in a row.
And then 5. What is it? How did the AFL manage that? Give them a 6-day break.
6 day, yeah.
Or 7.
Well, 7, but 6.
We won't complain.
No.
So that's their best 3 best midfielders out of the game.
Well, we don't know.
And as for Grundy, Maxi will be just licking his lips. He'll kill him.
Yeah.
Really.
And their second options are they use Amati and Logan McDonald in the ruck because they're so limited. But so, like I said, I don't think we'll be affected by Shaki going into the ruck this week. He's not going to come up against a monster by any stretch.
I watched about 15 minutes of the practice game. They played the first one, and JJ was playing. It's funny when he was one of my old favourite players at the D's, not my all-time favourite, but I liked him at the D's. But he was criticised often for taking too long to releasing the ball, holding it up, and he did it a number of times in that practice game. And I was, he's shocking. So, but as Sydney did, he topped their possession numbers.
Yeah, he got a lot of the ball, and I think he's a perfect player for Sydney to pick up, the same as Taylor Adams would have been.
But it's slow. If you think Adams is not quick, nor's Parker, Mills is okay, Goulden's quick, but he's not really a mid. So Robin, we'll talk about it at the season preview. I could see Swans not making the finals. I think they're the weakest team that played in the 8 last year, even weaker than the Saints.
And their forwards, it's Amati and Logan McDonald, and hoping Papley's the other one who scores all the goals for them. We've got the back line to be able to cover them off pretty quickly. McDonald and Logan and Amati are going to be great players in the future, but against Lever and May, they've got a long way to go. So, I don't think we'll have it'll be a good, honest game because it always is against the Swans. But we'll just overpower them, particularly with Max, the way he was just monstrous in this Carlton game, and he will monster Grundy and everybody else around the ground.
Well, I think we'll do we'll aim to keep them to 60 points, and 60 points is the new 75 points, I reckon. Because I haven't been reading any of the footy media at all, I had no clue about the rule change about the rucking. Do you know what that change is in terms of they're allowed to put their hand out in the centre?
Yeah, hand out to block. So
even in all contests, including the centre bounce, is that the rule change?
In the centre bounce, yeah. Yep.
Right. Because Maxi got a free kick. He almost fell off my couch at home in my aircon couch when he got a free kick. I think he got a free kick, the goal he kicked, didn't he?
Yeah.
Wasn't that from a free kick?
It was.
The first one?
Yes, it was. JJ had 31 possessions.
Good luck to him. Hope he does well.
He'll fit in very well with the way they play. So
we said last year we could not begrudge him for wanting to seek opportunities elsewhere. He wasn't getting them at the D's, and
ironic though, funny thing. He would have got his chance with Gus going down. So
absolutely, but good luck to him there. So Sydney lost by 25 points to Brisbane, but and Sydney had kicked the last 2 goals, so they were down by a bit more. But you mentioned that they had quite a few players out.
Just on this game coming up, you mentioned, George, the potentially having three players debuting. I was looking at it today in terms of our young players, and if you look at our young players under, say, 23. We've got up to 9 players under 23 playing will play in this game, and I think it's something like 6 players who are under 21 or under. So that's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, if you think so we've got potentially Howes, not Cos, Brown.
And Windsor.
What's his name? Forget it. Riv's only 22.
Bowie.
Bowie's only 20. I think just turned 22. Even
Laurie is the
Sparrow's
same,
only 24.
and Laurie's the same age as Bowie.
As Bowser, and JVR's only 21. He's turning 21 in 2 weeks or something, or he's just turned 21. It's incredible. So 9 players in a team that finished top 4 under the age of 23 and under. That's almost half a team in a round 1 game. That's it speaks to where we're at, and by contrast, the Pies have got the oldest list in the AFL. And Blues didn't look like they had many young players coming through in the game last night. Not any that stood out.
All right. I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. On demonland.com for our 2024 season preview show in the lead up to our opening round match next Thursday. Thank you to my co-hosts George and B-Man. As always, I couldn't do this show without you. Well, that is until the AI improves a little bit and I can replace you.
Glitch.
Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Tristan in Canada and Julian in the Netherlands. As always, your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to Pingu, Return to Glory, Dominion, Lefty, Doug Reamer, Stu, Smurf, Red Jacket, Leave It to Diva, Wodger the First, Bigfoot, City, Mandalorian, Scroll, D Old Fart, Singer. Thank you, guys, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on the next show. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on.